Health and wellness are more than a destination. They are a process and a journey of personal choice. Come hear from people out in the field, doing the work, bringing health and wellness to many. Hello, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have Elizabeth Chance with us today. She has had a very colorful past, very many things to share. She is a podcaster, host of a podcast show in America. What is it called?
It's called the Elizabeth Chance Podcast, formerly known as Busy Living Sober.
Nice. She's also a health and wellness coach. She helps people for many years recover from alcoholism. We are delighted to have you today, Busy. I am. And I'm just thrilled to hear your story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got here?
Sure. Thank you again, Kathleen, for having me on. I feel so blessed that I actually went on the internet and a friend said, you should really get some more documentation behind your name. And I said, okay, what am I going to do? And I thought about doing health and wellness coaching, and I found your school, which was an amazing experience. And I feel like I'm so blessed to be still part of your whole family.
Yeah.
And so I went to college in Washington, D.C., met my ex-husband, went on to have 3 children, and I got sober when right after I got divorced. I got divorced, which was something I really didn't want to do. I'd come from divorce, and so it was really the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to have the cleavers, for those of you that live in America, that you know who the cleavers are. Yes. Leave It to Beaver, with the white picket fence.
Yeah, you wanted that perfect life.
That perfect life.
Yeah.
And I thought I had it all orchestrated. But because of alcoholism, it kind of blew up. So
Can you tell me a little more about that history?
Sure. So I think it's important to talk about alcoholism as a family disease because there's a genetic component to it. So when I was growing up, my one grandmother was Irish Catholic and the other one was Jewish, and they both were alcoholics. Now, the crazy thing was, growing up, there was not a solution, right? It was just talked about in something that you have that's pretty... It was such a dark word, such a scary word. It was like, they're alcoholics. Yeah. And it had such a horrible connotation to it, right?
Definitely.
And so that was the last thing you would ever want to be, right? You don't want to be an alcoholic. So again, there was no solution. There was no stopping. My parents would still continue. Everybody would give them drinks. It didn't matter, right? There was no stopping. There was no, talk of, I don't know if there was ever talk of getting recovered, but so I knew what alcoholism was from a very young age. And again, it was a very negative thing. But at 13, I started drinking. Because I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, home of Anheuser-Busch. Budweiser, most beers are made by them, Amstel Light, all of those. And when we were kids, that's what we did for fun. We were in junior high, right? The summer of junior high, we went and we started drinking beers, and we'd ride our bikes to each other's houses. And I don't remember my first drink. I just remember that when I drank, I felt euphoric. I had no more problems. It was just like, oh my gosh, I can just relax. I can let my shoulders down. I'd mentioned earlier that my parents had a divorce, and for those of you who've ever seen the movie War of the Roses with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner, and they didn't die at the end. My parents didn't die at the end, but it was just very tumultuous. Lots of drama, lots of screaming, lots of yelling. And so that, as a child, especially as a teen, with
painful.
Very painful.
Yeah.
So I picked up that drink, and that was the answer. And I also, I've always been very social. And being, going to balls,
of course.
and
it's fun.
Exactly, and in the social pages and those sort of things. And I was always about having the pretty dress, the pretty shoes, all the accessories you needed. But I always would be the one that I'd always be looking at the bartender. I'd be always looking at the server. Like, where is the bar? And where
I understand.
You know what I'm talking about? In close proximity.
I have a very Irish Catholic family. So we are very similar. Yeah, I know this.
Yeah, so that's how it was. So I didn't have, the way I felt on the inside was the most important thing, which was that I really would wake up the next day and I didn't like myself.
Oh.
I didn't like myself. I didn't know where my car was. Sometimes I didn't know that was sitting next to me as well. So I'd say, oh, why did I do this again? Why did I do this again? And I remember that I would stand outside of, there's this one bar in Wayne, Pennsylvania, which is where I raised my children, near Villanova University. And I walked into that bar and I said, I would have sworn to you on my children's life that I was only going to have one dirty martini. But I couldn't have one.
Yeah.
It's the phenomenon of craving. So long story.
There's never enough, right?
There's never enough. And it's the first sip. It's not the 47th, because I could drink 47 cocktails and still be sitting here. I might have gone in and out of a blackout, but I'd still be sitting here. I wouldn't be like, I didn't really ever throw up. Only a couple times.
And you often hear that about alcoholics, that because I know I had, my mother was an alcoholic. Although I hate to use that word alcoholic. I kind of like to think that we're all sovereign human beings and we're just having this experience on earth, and sometimes we have addictions, and that's not who we really are. So I never really thought of her as an alcoholic, but she was an abuser of alcohol in her later years. She also had a divorce. But one of the things I remember is that she didn't get any bad things from it, except for it changed her behavior. So she didn't vomit. She didn't have any, that's really weird, because like if I were to have, I was different. So I obviously was in my genetics different, and I inherited something else. So when I would drink like 2 drinks or 3, I would feel so sick. I didn't want any more, but you didn't have that. No. So tell me a little bit about that.
And it's hard to describe what the phenomenon of craving is. I don't know if you've ever did you ever smoke cigarettes?
I only had one day that I tried and I vomited.
Okay.
I'm not the best person for this.
Okay, so I will just tell you this. So for me, drinking, I was a binge drinker, what you would call a binge drinker. And I want to pay respect to the alcoholic, because there's so many people who hate that word, including myself. When I had to say I'm an alcoholic, I'm like, oh, that comes with it's so heavy, it's so dark, right?
Yeah.
It's so full of shame.
Yes.
I was so wanting to change that word that I actually patented sober, not ashamed, because I did not like the word alcoholic, right? Because it has a horrible connotation. But the craving that happens when you drink is like if there's Oreos in your kitchen. It's like this thing.
Yeah, I can relate to like sugar.
Right, like sugar.
I can relate that you start and my kids, oh my goodness, when children start to eat sugar.
And they can't stop.
They can't stop, and they start to change. They start to become crazy.
And that's the same thing with alcohol, right?
It's sugar.
It's sugar. It's total sugar, right? And so it goes into my system. It alerts the frontal lobe of my brain. It lights up like a Christmas tree, and we want more. Now, does this mean I'm a morally bad person? No. Does it mean that that's the one thing that I don't like about the alcoholic word, because there is such a negative connotation from movies, right? From the press and what happens to people. They're like, oh, look at that person's an alcoholic. I don't want to call out Charlie Sheen, but remember back in the day, that was kind of like, oh, look at him. Or, in old movies, it was the bums, right? A person who would go and carry their bottle in a brown paper bag and jump on trains.
Yeah. Well, think about something. We learn as health coaches that like all addictions serve us. So if you think about that, it's not about shame. It's about an addiction helps us for whatever reason to be on earth, because earth is not an easy place to live. So if you're on earth and you're looking around and things don't make sense and they don't feel good, and you want to be feeling better, and you're with a bunch of people and you're like, how am I going to behave? I feel so insecure. I don't feel myself here. Then drinking is a very natural way to help you feel a little more loose. Yeah, I'm a little more loose. So we understand how it begins, right?
And alcohol, let's just face it, it's legal, right?
Yeah.
And
it wasn't always.
Right, it wasn't always. There was prohibition. But everybody does it socially, right? So you go to a party, everybody's drinking. You go out for dinner, there's a bar. When in doubt, there's a bar in the restaurant where you're drinking, where you're eating. And it's, for me in the beginning, when I decided to put it down, and I didn't have anything, dramatic that happened at the very end, besides losing my shoes at my sister's wedding, which wasn't that dramatic. I mean, there were no sirens chasing me. There was no metal. There was no metal around my wrist. I was just so sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was divorced at that point. I had 3 small children, and life can be scary. And I want to point out that during COVID, the numbers of people that have alcoholism compared to back prior, because there's this fear that's now in the universe, right? When you throw fear out there, what takes away the fear?
Yeah, anything that can make you go away a little bit.
Exactly.
So drugs also, obviously.
Exactly,
right?
Drugs and alcohol. And it's been horrible since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so getting to this place of like these feelings, as you mentioned, walking into a party, when you don't feel comfortable in your own skin, you're going to be like, I'm going to go up and I'm going to get myself... Now I can't believe how much people drink tequila, by the way. I'm like, I had no idea until just recently. I went to a wedding and everybody was going to the bar going, I'm going to have a tequila. And I was like, wait, you're having this at the beginning? I would always have tequila at the end of the night. But now people are drinking more than ever before. Yes. And it's really an epidemic within itself, because during the pandemic also, they did not close liquor stores. Now they
chose churches. I know.
They closed churches.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Where they held 12-step meetings. So 12-step meetings where people would normally gather to get together and talk, they couldn't meet. You couldn't go be with your friends at church, but you could go to the liquor store. And I know a lot of people that died due to drinking, not from COVID. Okay, they fell in their homes. They hit their heads.
Yeah, of course.
Or they had, we could talk about the vaccine and then having the vaccine and then drinking to that extent and having a massive heart attack. So it's a horrendous disease, which I would love to bring out of the shadows, because it's nothing to be ashamed of.
No, I think it's so beautiful, your work, Busy, because honestly, this is a problem, and it is really a problem with the youth, because they're looking at this world. They come to this world and they say, where have I arrived? This place is a zoo. This is like a crazy world, because I don't even know, the old structures right now are falling, right? And the new kids are here and they don't know what's going to happen. It's not so clear where we're going, although we do feel it's going to be a better place. I do believe that after all the awakening is over. But I think right now the youth are just it's very intense. And so they drink to leave all the suffering, and it helps for the moment that they're drinking. And so that's one of the things about alcoholism, is that it makes you in a sort of numb state. Share a little bit about that. So when you're drinking, you don't feel the pain.
You don't feel the pain. You don't feel anything. You don't really feel happy. I mean, you could be acting gregarious, but you're not really feeling happy. You're not feeling sad. I guess at the end of the night, I wasn't a very emotional drinker.
Yeah.
I know some people change. I didn't really change. I mean, I was kind of like, I've always been loud, and I've always been a little boisterous. And so, but for me, that phenomenon, once you start drinking, there's this buzz that happens. And the buzz lasts about 10 seconds maybe. And where you feel completely 100% euphoric. Like I would say Wonder Woman.
That's the addiction.
Yeah. That is where you're like, I want to keep feeling like this. But the problem is you don't go back to that 10 seconds again.
No.
Once you have the 10 seconds, but because of our brain chemistry, you can't stop. Yeah. Like you could have said to me, stop. I'm like, I can't stop.
No.
It's like
the brain wants more.
The brain wants more.
The body wants more.
The body wants, and so abstinence is my only option, because I've watched so many people that they could have 30 years. I've watched people with 40 years. I've watched people with 4 days. I've watched people with 4 weeks. I've watched people with 4 years that go back out again. I have to have a daily reprieve from it. So I do it one day at a time. And you see that
with my mother too.
Yeah.
We got her help and she went into a clinic, and then she got over it, and for the rest of her life she was over it. We were really excited, because I believe that if you conquer an addiction in this life, you will never have it again. So it's kind of spiritually, it's about conquering it. So you're right. You're going to have this little thing showing up all the time. Are you sure you're really over this? Are you sure that you love yourself now, that you feel good about yourself? It's actually forcing you to grow, right? When you say busy, this whole process. So it's not for nothing that you go through it.
Oh, it's for everything. I mean, I've got the tools that I've learned in almost the past 17 years have been, oh my gosh, priceless. Yeah. I mean, I use some of the tools today. Acceptance, right? I have to accept that everything is okay today.
Yeah.
Right now, I can't change anything. I'm powerless. I'm powerless that the person didn't help me lift my bag to get on the plane this morning. This gentleman didn't. I was a little upset by it, but I did sit back and say, okay, whatever, pray for him. That's what I did. Yeah. But these are tools I learned on this journey of sobriety.
So it was wonderful in a way. Like you learned so much.
Like if I were going to, and I've heard, this is not, I'm not the first person to say this, you know, if I were to get a disease, alcoholism is the one I want to get. Okay, let's be honest. Because I don't want to have to go and get hooked up and have to get, insulin all the time. Yep. I wouldn't want to have to go get kidney work done all the time, like to go have kidney dialysis all the time.
And alcoholism is a disease.
Alcoholism
Can you tell me about that?
Is a disease.
Physically, tell me about
physically, that. It's that DNA that's passed down. I believe that I got it from either my mother's side or my mother's side or my father's side. It came down to me. I genetically had it in my body since the minute I was born.
So you were susceptible, but we know from epigenetics that you said it was also environmental.
It was.
So you had a lot of environmental influences.
So which helped propel it, right?
Yes.
So I think that if I'm going to just use my own family, my own children as an example. Yeah. So I have 3 children. My ex-husband is sober and so am I. So we both have battled this disease. Now, since my kids were born, pretty much, Kent was 10 when I got sober and Hadley was 8 and Henry was 6. But I've been talking about this as something to watch out for since they were little, right? I wasn't ashamed to say, oh, guess what? Let me tell you, it wasn't talked about like it was when I was growing up. And I don't fault my parents. It was just a totally different time. But to say, you know what, this is something you could very well have. I did not do a DNA test on you yet, or I haven't as of yet, and they're in their mid to late 20s, to see if you have this gene. But I'm going to tell you that if you have this gene and you trigger it, then you're done.
Okay, now I want to ask you something because I do believe in genetics, but I also totally believe in the epigenetics, which means that we have some issues around the situation that are presenting themselves, like behaviors. Like the alcohol is one thing you inherit, but also think about the behaviors you inherit or the low self-esteem you could inherit. There's so much that we can inherit that is on this disease, right? It's not just, it might seem just like an alcoholic gene, but it's far more. So let's look at your life. Let's look back, and I'm sure you've been working, we're going to get to that next question, which you've been working with a lot of people with this problem. But let's look at your life and say, okay, I had this problem. What is it? How is this problem related to low self-esteem?
I think if you were to look in the United States, they all fall under the same umbrella when they're treated, which is mental illness. Okay. So they're all under mental illness. So for me, obviously growing up I'm not faulting my parents. They did an amazing job. They did the best job they could do. I don't think any parents go out there saying, I want to screw up their kids by any stretch of imagination. But I think some of us are more sensitive than others. And we don't know that unless we know it, right? So sitting down, and when I was a little girl, and my dad said that when I was like 2 years old, I walked around the coffee table, because my parents had cocktail parties all the time, right? This is in the 70s, right? I was born in 1968, so during the 70s and early 80s, cocktail parties and everybody, and I went around that table and I drank all the liquor, and everybody said, oh, look at little Elizabeth, she's drunk.
Yeah.
She's so cute. How cute is that?
Yeah, terrible.
And then I remember as I grew up, 10 years old, I'm looking at my parents at these cocktail parties, and Mom looks so happy. right? She's in a pretty dress.
Yeah.
She's got a beautiful Waterford cup, a glass in her hand with her Chardonnay.
Yeah.
My dad looks so happy. Everybody looks so happy, right? They're at a party. I could not wait to grow up and do that. I couldn't wait.
Yeah, I understand.
You know?
But were they happy?
Well, it wasn't for me. I mean,
That's the answer.
right.
What is happiness?
I mean,
Like,
what is happiness? And
so
for me,
self-esteem is under it. So how is that connected?
I think that again, I got sober when I was 37 and I started drinking at 13. Now, I didn't know any other, that was what I did. Okay, so if you were going to say, did you go out and play? I play tennis every once in a while. I play golf every once in a while. But I was never, like, what did I do for fun? I went to parties.
Yeah.
I went social. That's what I did.
I understand.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it was part of your
It was
ritual.
part of, and the
Yeah.
people that I hung out with, now, were they all
drank.
alcoholics? No, by no stretch of the imagination. Some of them can handle it, and some, I don't, it's not for me to say. But I know I hung out with people that could drink the same way I did. So it did not appear to be like, oh, I have a self-esteem issue. Because if you saw me, I knew every person in every bar. I was on the front page of, I mean, I'm getting letters from, my local representative with, there I am in a gorgeous dress on the front page of the social pages with the dirty martini in my hand.
Which seemed to like almost make it worse, right? Because that just perpetuates it.
Right, well, it
'Cause then
glamorizes it.
Yeah,
right,
right, exactly.
Because how am I going to go do that without a cocktail in my hand?
Oh yeah, that's true. So that's an interesting point.
So it's very hard.
So-
it's like which came
So you
first?
don't realize, like you had enough confidence, you yourself had enough confidence to be there socially, and the drink was fun and all the people. But when you really go in and you really ask the question, did I love myself? Did I esteem myself? Or did I need something to do that?
Well, I was raised in a way, and I don't know if you'll relate to this.
Yeah.
So life was about like a form. You know how when you go to the doctor's office and you fill out a form and you do these checklists?
Yeah.
So let's do the checklist. So you're supposed to graduate from high school. Check.
Yes.
You're supposed to go to college.
Yeah.
Check. You're supposed to get married to somebody who can fit into, fits into your family mold. Check. You buy the right house. Check. You have children. Check.
Yeah.
You belong to the right country club. Check. My life was all about getting these check marks. Okay, I did that. Check. That's done. I did that. Check. That's done. So when you think about how was I feeling on the inside, I had no idea. My whole life was about getting to a destination. It wasn't about the journey. It's like, oh wait, no, I got to get married. Check. All right, I got that. All right, let me have a baby. I had one baby. Okay, now I had another baby. Now I have another baby. You buy homes, you buy cars, you do all these things because society says you're to do these, at least where I was raised, right?
That's normal. These are social norms. That
Right,
you just,
social norms. And I did all those things.
And they're also belief systems.
Exactly. So for me, I didn't know how I felt. It wasn't until I had a year of sobriety till I really even knew who I was. Now I had 3 children. I had bought 3 houses. I don't want to know how many cars. I had made major life decisions. But did I know who I was? No idea.
Can you go into that a little further? What does that mean to know yourself?
To really know what's important to you. What are those feelings you feel on the inside? I mean, I remember people saying, I have anxiety, I'm depressed. I'm like, what is that? Because I wasn't raised where we talked about those things.
Yeah, and you didn't want to feel that or admit that, right?
No, I mean, like for
it
one,
wasn't something we wanted to do. No.
And if you were depressed, you were like Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that's really what it was.
It's like a taboo.
It was a total taboo. And anxiety, that wasn't even a buzzword until my kids' generation, I think. So having all those, knowing who you were, it was, okay, did you fit into the cocktail party? Did you get the right invitations? Were you in the social register? Did you do that? Did you get in the black book? All these things that were the social norms that you had to do in the group that I was in, my group of society that I was linked with.
So the bottom line is getting the real you started to feel. And the real you started to feel, who am I? Meaning, I don't need to be all that society wants me. Who am I without that?
Well, after I'd gotten divorced, and my drinking took a whole new level when I got divorced, because I like to describe it as I threw a grenade in the living room and shrapnel hit everybody. So everybody was sad, right? My kids were sad.
Yeah.
My ex-husband was sad. I had let people down. Now society-wise, I'm not in the same group because now I'm divorced.
Yeah.
There's all these feelings that come along with that, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, I felt so sad, alone. I had no one to turn to, and that's when if I had a boat and you take the pedal to the metal, and I would drink when my kids went with their dad, because I was so alone.
Yeah.
And I felt so ashamed, remorseful, lost. And so I'd go out and I'd drink, and then I'd get up the next morning and I'd feel terrible about myself. And my kids would come home and I'd be like, go play in traffic. And I literally meant it, because I hated myself and who I had become. And the ironic thing, as I was talking about the end of my drinking, I went on a run on the beach in Ocean City, New Jersey in August, which is not like let's face it, it's really hot in New Jersey in August.
By the way, I have to say, I'm so impressed with how open you can be about it, Busy. It's so helpful. I hope the audience can appreciate that is just such a gift to get to the point where you can speak about this. It's almost like a trauma in for others to connect with. I just want to say how beautiful it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean that from my heart.
Thank you so much.
Such a beautiful journey.
The reason I do this is because I know there's so many other moms that are out there that feel like this.
Yes.
And dads. And we feel lost.
But you were on this New Jersey, you were just saying about this beach walk.
I was on this beach walk.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So I get up on this August 14th. The night before, I had been drinking. I literally was sitting at the end of the dock of the bay. My feet were hanging off our dock. And somebody had said to me 2 days before that he thought I was an alcoholic. Of course, he was really good looking, because it always has to come from a good looking guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, you're an alcoholic. And I was like, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. But I got in the car and I drove to the beach. Am I an alcoholic? Am I not an alcoholic? I got there that night. Somebody said, do you want to drink? I said, no. I woke up the next morning. I'm like, see, I'm not an alcoholic. And then at 4 o'clock, somebody said, do you want to drink? And I drank by myself at the end of the dock of this bay. And I got up the next morning and I went for a run on the beach. And anybody who knows me knows I do not run unless someone's chasing me. And that doesn't really happen. But I went on a run and I fell to my knees and I just said, God, please help me. I don't want to do this anymore. And that's the last time I had a drink.
Wow.
That was my end of my drinking. That was it.
What did that give you?
A life that I have today that's beyond anything I could ever imagine. Because I can't imagine if I kept drinking what my kids would have been like, what my life would have been like.
Yeah.
It would have been unfathomable. I don't even want it. It makes me shudder. I don't want to even think
And
about
when you asked God for help, what did you feel?
I felt like the gig was up.
You got help somehow.
I went back to my beach house. My sister was there, who was married to a gentleman who's been sober for decades, and I told him that I wanted to quit, and he was like, "You're not quitting." I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And he's like, "No, you're not." Because everybody thought I was the last, I danced with the band.
Yeah, they couldn't imagine.
No, because I was the party girl.
Could you still dance without the alcohol?
Of course.
Okay.
No.
And that's the good news. But what did you obviously got help from some higher power that you felt. How would you think, though, that the alcohol affects people spiritually? Because we numb ourselves physically. Do we also numb ourselves spiritually?
Completely. I think that when someone is in active alcoholism, if you walk into an old church and you look up at the stained glass window. Now, this is an old church, and you know there's a stained glass window there, right? But there's a lot of soot on it, right? So you know something's beautiful there, but it's being covered.
Yeah.
That's how it is for active alcoholism. There is no spiritual. The spirit comes from the alcohol. Alcohol is a spirit.
Yeah.
That's why they call it
irony.
the spirit. Yes, they call it a spirit store.
Yeah.
So when I came in, I was spiritually broke. I was spiritually bankrupt. I was like that beautiful stained glass window that was filled with soot.
Yeah, so you had a lot of darkness. It's almost like in my work with helping people heal, I have seen dark entities, believe me, and I have seen them with alcoholics because they're vulnerable. They don't protect themselves. They don't know how to protect. They're not almost not there anymore. So they're drinking and they're not in their body. And we really, in life, we have to kind of own our being, our energetic being. And if we don't own it and protect it, it can be literally taken over on this earthly plane, let's say. And so I have seen that in my work, but I think it's something when you're in it, you don't even notice it because you're just surviving, right? Every day you're kind of doing the same stuff, doing the same parties or whatever you were doing, and then the drink starts and you get that high, which you think is why you're doing it, to feel good, to get the pain away. And actually, I want to ask a question that's kind of spiritual. How, in the end, we drink to get the pain away. How did you handle, like, your sobriety? How did you handle pain then? Because that was what you had to do, right?
Well, you know, we sometimes pick up other things, like candy.
Yeah.
I did eat a lot of a chocolate. I like to eat chocolate. But it took time. And, you know, I am in a 12-step program. And I'm not going to say the name of it, but you can assume what it is. And so I went to a meeting. My brother-in-law suggested that I go try this meeting, and I asked someone to help me, a fellow traveler, to help me along my path. Yeah. And I've had a couple of women that have had that job, maybe 5 or 6 at this point, that have helped me along my path, and to be able to identify, you know, the feelings. I really had somebody I could talk to all the time.
Nice.
So when my children were little, and it was, you know, that bewitching hour with children after school, and you're making dinner, and you have homework that has to be done, and, you know, the dog's barking, and all these things are going on, and all you want to do is just run away. And I could call my person and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and kind of verbally throw up on them, and they'd say, well, I heard you. Now go back and make your chicken surprise. I'd be
and did it help?
It totally helped.
So what was it? Was it because you had mentioned the word acceptance to me earlier about the pain?
Like being able to acknowledge it and have another human being say, I hear you.
Okay.
I hear you.
Yeah, beautiful.
I understand how you feel. I get it.
Yeah.
It's
like a worthiness almost. Like your worth, someone would listen to you, you were heard.
Exactly.
And that might have been something in your past that was not there.
Exactly.
Because you were the kid and it was quiet and you were just drinking and they were drinking and you were not heard.
But to be heard by someone else that says, I get you.
How beautiful.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I felt the same exact way.
Yeah. You
aren't crazy. You actually are exactly the way you're supposed to be. And that is the huge gift. Because
so how long did it take you? Let's say you went through this process. Is it still a process? Or do you feel like you've conquered it?
I still participate in meetings because I have watched so many people that say that they go and they start drinking again, and the reason they do is because they stopped going to these meetings. And I'm like, if I just have to go to these meetings to keep me front and center, I'm going to do that because I don't want to go back to what my life was.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever lose myself again.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly recovering. I'm constantly unpeeling the onion of my life. I'm here in Amsterdam. I'm peeling more layers, and
Well, everyone is busy.
Isn't it
doesn't
great?
even matter.
You're right.
I think right now it's such a beautiful time where people are doing this, and we need to do this because it's really an awakening time. So we're learning a lot about ourselves. But I want for the audience, for them to understand physically, like I think you made it very clear now. It had a spiritual component, the alcoholism, definitely an emotional, not dealing with all these, not having to feel all these heavy, lower frequency emotions. You drink also to get in the high emotion, like joy, suddenly that's the perk. And it's an addiction instead of really genuinely be joyful, right? Genuinely joyful is a whole nother thing. So what I'm curious now for the audience, the physical, what does it do? Like I know in the old days, we gave people alcohol as sedation. We did not have drugs. So if I were gonna do surgery on you, I would have a little drip of alcohol and you would get this alcohol in an IV, or you would drink it. Actually, it started drinking it, not even IV. They would give it to people to drink, and they would drink as much as they could, and then they would do the surgery. It's amazing, isn't it? And at a certain point, the brain goes to sleep. That's what it does physically. It starts with the frontal cortex, it goes all the way back, and the dangerous part, of course, is if we put the medulla to sleep, right? Because if you put the medulla, which is your brainstem, asleep, you are going to stop breathing. Mm-hmm. So people do die of alcohol just because they gave themselves too much. Usually the body will react, but with an alcoholic, they build their tolerance, right? So what happens to an alcoholic physically?
Well, physically, not only can they die from their stopping breathing, but you can also, get sick and
asphyxiate on your vomit.
On your vomit. I've known that to happen to a couple of people that I've known that have died that way. Physically, I talked about the phenomenon of craving. I talked about the fact that it also is a depressant. We think that because some people take it and it makes them high, right? And they're like, yay, let's dance, let's put on a tutu. But some people, it makes them cry. Yeah. Some people, it makes them mean.
Yeah.
You have no idea. They call it the Jekyll and Hyde, right? Because you don't know what you're going to get at that moment in each day. None of us know, right? We don't know if we're going to drink and we're going to be happy. We don't know if we're going to, there could be something that we've been carrying around for a long time.
So it definitely opens the subconscious. So we just don't know what's in that subconscious, what shows up, right?
And it's dangerous. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't think any parents want to screw their kids up, right? But then you have the parents that drink sometimes and they say things when they're inebriated, and can you take it back?
Yeah.
That's the hard part. It's literally like you're playing Russian roulette with your life. You might as well just what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. Especially if you have the tendency, and I was a binge drinker. I did not get to that point that I needed it every day. I did not have...
But you drank a lot when you drank.
When I drank a lot, yes.
Yeah. And what about your liver? Did you feel, you said you were tired. Physically,
I was tired, but I had 3 little babies. I was divorced, so there were a lot of things that were contributing to it. But I know that your liver enzymes your liver. This is what I know.
It's lot too of much people. For the liver.
Your liver can't process it. It's sugar.
Yeah. And also the liver cleans.
Right.
And this is just pure toxins, right? So you're giving the body a heavy load of toxicity every day.
And it stays in your genes as well. It doesn't stay as long as marijuana does, because marijuana stays in your system for at least 30 days, where alcohol only stays in it for 24.
Yeah, it stays in your system, and in the sense that I remember when my mother became sober, they told us it would be a while till we saw her true personality. It would take at least a month. They have a whole regime in these clinics where they're giving you counseling, they're helping you. And it was like a Betty Ford on the East Coast clinic that my mother went to. But it really helped her because at first they start feeling things when they're going off the alcohol. First of all, as a nurse, you have a physical withdrawal, which is not fun. That's the first week, yeah. And then you have to get help with that, and then you have the emotional stuff coming, and then you have to have the counseling and everything. But they told us the personality would change, and she did. She was not happy, and she was not an easy person with drinking. Not a good personality. Like you said, you never know who. And once she went off the alcohol, she became, again, who she really is. It was so beautiful. And so, some of the people in our family who didn't even know her, like I knew her because she was my mother and she never drank when we were little. but after her divorce it started. But some of the people in our family, they didn't remember her, and then she came back. It was like a rebirth. So it was so beautiful. So I think, like, from my own experience, I really admire the work you do. I just think it's so important. I want to ask you about what you do, because we haven't spoken about that. You are a coach, and you also have this podcast to help people with this problem. Can you share a little bit about that?
So I will tell you, I became a recovery coach when about 14 years ago. And I'd always worked for myself, and I decided that I wanted to help alcoholics and drug addicts. And so I was certified, and I saw families, because I can't just fix the alcoholic.
No.
Especially if it's a younger person. The whole family needs to be helped.
That's true.
And a lot of the treatment centers that are out there are 12-step. So I worked with the 12-step, but then also some people didn't want to do 12-step. So we would talk about different alternatives to 12-step that might be more appropriate for that person, and ways and different foods that they could eat, and different sorts of things that they could do, rather than going to a meeting where they didn't feel comfortable, because a lot of people get turned off about the God aspect of 12-step. But I even talked about that. So I went into that, and then I would give talks in my town called Let's Talk, and we would talk about alcoholism, especially with our kids, because kids in middle school through high school tend to abuse alcohol. No one would want to come. Let's face it. It's like you're inviting me to your party, sometimes like inviting the Grim Reaper to an old age home, right? You're like, oh my gosh, here she is. She's cutting my drink. She doesn't drink. But I'd have these talks.
It's like a bummer.
It's a total bummer. You're like, why did she invite her? And then a friend of mine invited me to a round table she was having in Philadelphia. And it was with all these big executive women. And the woman that was giving the talk said to me, she goes, what do you do? And I said, I'm a recovery coach, and I've just patented Sober Not Ashamed.
Yeah.
And she said, oh my gosh, I love what you're doing, because I've always tried to change the stigma. When I went and met with them, they said, why don't you start a podcast? I was like, what is a podcast? So I started a podcast over 6 years ago. It's called Busy Living. It was called Busy Living Sober. I just changed the name this year, just so that more people could maybe talk about it, and it didn't have the sober word in it anymore.
So what is it now?
Now it's called the Elizabeth Chance Podcast.
Okay.
And so I have different specialists on. I have friends on. I just had I have a psychiatrist coming on this week. I've had astrologers come on. I've had some of your teachers come on from A Wellness Revolution. And I'm just there to share with people that we can get through this thing called life together.
Yeah.
Just knowing you're not alone. Yeah. Having whatever feeling you're going through.
Nice, Busy.
Yeah, we want to be there for each other and help raise each other up instead of bring each other down.
Okay, Busy. So I just am curious, like, obviously alcoholism, it affects all areas of your life. Can you share a little bit about that, about how that affects everyone who is an alcoholic differently? We're all different.
We're all different, but and again, the way that I drank, I still was a functioning member of my society. I still went to church. I still got my kids dressed and took them to their sporting events. I did all of those things. But I stopped at 37. I don't know what it would have been like if I hadn't stopped then. You just tend to get worse, right? Your liver starts to break down more. You have more, your shaking becomes more. You can also go and choose if it doesn't work anymore the way it was, you're obviously going to ingest so much more, right? So let's say you normally had 2 dirty martinis. Now you're having a 5th of vodka a day. You could go to a gallon a day.
So eventually you might become not functional.
Exactly.
And what about areas like your career, obviously it affects everything. Your relationship, your husband, you had a divorce.
I had a divorce. I know people that have lost custody of their children. I know people that could not quit and it was up to the judge said, you need to quit or you're going to lose your children. And they said, I can't quit. And they lost their children. Yeah. You can lose everything. I've seen people that have lost everything. And we call that a bottom.
bottoming out.
Yeah. So what is my bottom? Like my bottom compared to somebody else's bottom, everybody's elevator, some people's elevator, a lot of people's elevator is death, institutions,
Yeah,
or jail.
really bad, really, really bad.
Or jail, right? Because
Or drugs, or they go to drugs.
Or they go to, but over 90% of the people that are in prison are due to alcohol and drugs.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's crazy.
It's just amazing. Wow, I didn't even know that statistic. That's crazy. All right, so let's say people want to quit, and you've mentioned AA. Can you share other things that people can do?
Well, I think for one, you always need to speak to your doctor before stopping. I don't care if you think you're only having a couple, you really need to speak to a doctor, because I do know people that have died by detoxing on their own.
Yeah.
Because your body becomes so, relies on it, right?
Yeah.
And you take it away, and I know someone that had seizures and died.
Yeah.
So call your doctor. And I know so many people are nervous to tell people, again, that shame component. Telehealth is such a great idea, because then, right, you don't really have to know the doctor. Go on telehealth.
Yeah, you don't have to tell who you are.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I also like, that the best thing Elton John said that came out of the pandemic is Zoom AA meetings, because you don't actually have to go to a church basement, open the door, walk down the steps. You just have to turn on your computer. You don't even have to keep your screen on. You don't even have to have your name, and you can see what a meeting is like. I have to say, there's nothing better than an in-person meeting, because that feeling that you get in a meeting is amazing. But first,
a lot of love and support.
Lots of love and lots of support, and not a lot of judgment. So that's, and if they do judge you, then find another person, because nobody's perfect anywhere you go. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't like the first meeting you go to another one. Because I didn't like every local bar. So I definitely don't think that I would like.
That's funny. Oh, busy. Well, that is amazing. So I think that's really helpful. But I do believe that you're right. Get some help. Find somebody that you can reach out to. I think it's really important. I just have one last question. Where do you see yourself in the future?
I see myself in the future sharing more of the health and wellness aspects to the recovery, because I think all of that together makes a beautiful cake.
Yeah.
I think that just helping more people to be able to come out and say, yeah, I have this too, and it's not going to define me. Just like you said about your mom. I mean, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, but that's not everything I am. I mean, I could go through a checklist of what I am. You know, I'm a wife.
You are what you are.
Yeah.
You are, I am. You are the I am.
I am. And I don't fit in a box. And I don't think any of us do. And I think that's my biggest goal for the next 10 years, is to help people realize you don't have to push yourself into a box.
Yeah.
You get to
be yourself.
You. Be you.
Oh,
love you.
It's lovely.
Thank you
it's lovely
so much,
to have
Kathleen.
you, Busy.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Wonderful.